Many beginners struggle to get super sharp photos in low light conditions. Most often they'll end up with results that are incredibly mushy and grainy, and it's just appalling to look at. Blah! Get that away from me. And I don't blame them. This is one of the most difficult part of photography because it requires a lot of balancing of different settings on your camera. But don't worry, I, Jason Vong, will give you step-by-step instructions to master low light photography, both handheld and utilizing a tripod. So, if you want, get your camera ready, set it to manual mode, and follow a Vong.
High ISO explained.
So here I made a little setup that might feel similar to what you have going on in your own home, especially the minimal lighting. Nothing fancy. That way you can easily apply the practice right now, so you'll be a master of low light when you're out and about in the world. Got my one-piece Luffy action figure on top of a lens, and a nice cozy background that I pulled up from YouTube. Now, the biggest culprit to noisy photos is utilizing a high ISO. If you turn on your camera right now and scroll through your ISO setting, you'll find that you can shoot as high as 102,400. Now, even though that's an option, we should never be shooting at the max. Ugh, look at all that noise. Gross. In case you don't know or need a quick refresher, ISO is generally used to compensate for the lack of light to achieve proper exposure in our shot. Moving to the left to a lower number darkens our image, whereas moving it to the right brightens it. If we're shooting in some type of auto mode, chances are our camera will prioritize giving us the proper exposure, and usually it will jack up our ISO to oblivion, and that's why we would end up with results like this. So, instead, if you're using a full frame camera, you generally don't want to go past ISO 6400, and if you're using an APS-C camera, you don't want to go past 3200. Of course, newer cameras can push past these limits and still get decent results, but these recommended max ISO settings are a good starting point for beginners to keep in mind. Now, the camera that I'm using right here is the Sony a6700, an APS-C sensor camera. And look at the difference between ISO 3200 and ISO 102,400. While there are still grain and noise present in the ISO 3200 shot, we now at least have a much better looking image that we can try to save in editing. So now that we have an ISO ceiling, let's work on our other settings. Because remember, low light photography is all about balancing all of our settings to achieve the best results.
Aperture.
So the way for us to shoot at a lower ISO is by introducing more light, and we can do that in 3 different ways. 1, using the widest open aperture available to our lenses. 2, utilizing a slower shutter speed time. Or 3, physically adding in more light. We'll talk about using the widest open aperture first because this is typically the first setting I would change when shooting handheld in low light situations. Now, for the sake of the demo, I'll just leave it on the tripod for now, but we'll take it off the tripod later just to show you how I do it handheld. That didn't intend to be dirty. When it comes to aperture and low light, especially shooting handheld, choose the smallest number possible on your lens. If you're using a starter kit lens that came bundled with your camera, likely the widest you can shoot at is at f3.5. I don't have a kit lens on me, so I'll just set my aperture to 3.5 on the lens that I do have, and just look at how much brighter our image is becoming. Now we can lower our ISO even more from 3200 to 800. Ho ho ho. Now, it is recommended to upgrade to a prime lens like an f1.8, as that will significantly help you shoot at the lowest ISO possible. Now watch as I'm opening my aperture from f3.5 to f1.8. Look at how much more I can drop my ISO, all the way down to ISO 320, significantly reducing the noise straight out of camera. Now the extra benefit of having an f1.8 prime lens is that we get that sweet background blur. And you can see how the aperture blades in your lens are opening up to a wider circle. That's how the lens is letting in more light into your sensor, thus reducing the need to raise your ISO to compensate for the lack of light.
Shutter speed.
Next up, shutter speed. And this would be the second setting I would change when doing low light photography handheld. So let's go ahead and take it off the tripod now. When shooting handheld in low light situations, you want your shutter speed to at least match the focal length you're shooting with if you're using a full frame sensor camera, or double the focal length if you're using an APS-C camera. Now, just so I don't neglect my kit lens users, I'm gonna set my aperture back to f3.5 just so you can see what your setup is capable of. Remember, we always set our aperture first when it comes to doing low light photography handheld. Then, because I'm using a 24mm lens on an APS-C camera, I'm going to double it and set our shutter speed to 1/50. And finally, ISO. We're going to raise it until we have proper exposure, and hopefully not go past our recommended max ISO suggestion. Now, just stay calm, stay steady, and take our shot. Zooming in and... Okay, we're a little off, and that's okay. Low-light photography is tricky and it requires a few trial and error. That's just how it is. Remember, stay calm, stay steady, and let's take our shot again. All right, let me just get up for this so I have a better position. And 3, 2, 1. Bam, look at that. Tack sharp and very minimal noise. All right. So comparing this with our high ISO shot that our camera determined for us in auto mode, same lighting conditions, but yet we have a much better looking image, all because we follow 3 simple rules for handheld photography in low light. 1, set our aperture to the widest value. 2, set our shutter speed to match or double the focal length we're shooting in. And 3, set our ISO until we achieve proper exposure. Now, if you're starting to go past the recommended max ISO suggestion, we can just set our ISO at the suggested max already and try to use a slower shutter speed just a little bit more and hope for the best. And some cameras with in-body image stabilization will allow you to shoot at the slower shutter speed, handheld, while still giving you sharp results. Otherwise, we'll have to tread into tripod territory. They are a pain to bring along with, but they make low-light photography infinitely easier. So let's go outside, shall we?
Tripod.
So here's the classic cityscape of Shinjuku in Tokyo, Japan. The hustle and bustle vibe from the commuters and the tourists, and neon lights and ads from the buildings. And I got the Sony RX100 Mark VII here on a tripod, and we're gonna capture this iconic shot. Now, if we let our camera shoot in auto, we'll end up with a grainy and noisy shot like this. But by going manual and using a tripod, we no longer have to raise our ISO. In fact, shutter speed would be the only setting we'll need to worry about. So the order of sequence here is going to be different when we're using a tripod in low light. First, we'll set our ISO to the lowest possible, and that's going to be 100. Next, we'll set our aperture to the lowest value. And again, for my kit lens viewers at home, I'll shoot at f3.5 for you guys so you can see what's possible with your setup. Then we will adjust our shutter speed from fraction numbers to whole numbers until we get a decent exposure. And lastly, we're gonna enable our 2-second timer on our camera and take our shot. Boom! What a difference, right? Just look at how clean our black sky is. And the lighting from the signages, mwah, absolutely beautiful. And with a little editing, look at how much enhancing we can do to our low light images. In fact, our aperture value here can be as high as f9, which would give us these nice star twinkles from these light sources. We would simply need to compensate a bit more with our shutter speed by slowing down the shutter even more. And this is gonna be the key setting to use when you're photographing especially very dark environments. So the next time you head out to a dark and spooky forest or trying to capture some astral stars, remember to bring your tripod and let shutter speed do all the work. Now you might have noticed, where are the people? Where are the cars? So what we just did is called a long exposure. That means anything that was in motion, i.e. people and cars, as long as they exit out of frame before the shutter releases, they will disappear. They might leave trails behind, but anything that's stationary will remain in the photo without a single noise or speck on them. But that's also the drawback to long exposure. It works best with low light cityscape and landscapes, but not moving subjects. So if moving subjects are your main subject of interest in your photograph in low light, i.e. portraitures, stick to the handheld rule that we discussed in the first half of the video. With that said, I do have a couple more helpful tips before you go. So the harsh truth is, anytime we do raise our ISO past 800, we will inevitably still get those grain and noise. There's just no helping it. But if you follow the instructions in this video, there shouldn't be too much of it. And for those of you who are using Adobe Lightroom, there's a pretty good denoise feature that will clean that right up. And hey, if you enjoyed this video, consider a super thanks donation or simply stick around and listen to what my sponsor Squarespace has to say. Squarespace is an all-in-one platform to create beautiful websites. No coding knowledge needed. Just simply choose from their many templates and designs. Perfect for photographers and online shop owners. Use my link down below for a 14-day free trial, and when you're ready to launch, you can use my code JASONVONG to save 10% off your first purchase of your website or domain. Guys, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you guys in the next video. Peace.